Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's web seminar on SB 12. My name is Amy Lemley. I'm with John Burton Advocates for Youth, and we're very excited to share this information with you and to get your questions and your comments. As you see, it's really about improving college outcomes for foster youth through better access to the Pell Grant. And we really do these web seminars on our legislative agenda so we can take the time to really lay out the evidence for you, provide the policy rationale, hear your input, and answer your questions to really kick off the process by taking the necessary time to really understand what is this initiative trying to achieve, how is it trying to achieve it, and so we have a good open sense of what we're moving into as the policy moves forward. I'd like to start by introducing my colleagues who will be presenting with me. First, we'll hear from Martha Joseph. Martha is the operations manager here at John Burton Advocates for Youth and also a former foster youth. And you'll also hear from Debbie Rauscher. Debbie heads up all of our education work and specifically the California College Pathways Project. So between the three of us, we will do what you see here on the slide. We're going to talk about educational outcomes of youth in foster care, the provisions of Senate Bill 12, and then really wrap up with, if you like what you're hearing, if you feel this is the kind of intervention that California should adopt, that we're definitely going to ask for your help because everything over the last 10 years our organization has been able to accomplish has been because of a true and deep partnership with the public sector, with community-based organizations in the private sector, with young people themselves, and the full community of people in the child welfare and foster care communities. And we'll definitely leave time to make sure all of your questions are answered. But let's first start with, why are we having this conversation? How did we get here? And it's really because, while we've made tremendous gains in a lot of areas in foster care, and I'm not one to, find fault with the system necessarily, and an area where we continue to struggle are academic outcomes. And the reality is there are some pretty good reasons why these academic outcomes are so poor. As you can see on the slide, well, first, they have experienced maltreatment serious enough to have them placed in the child welfare system. That is their starting point. But then from there, we know that placement changes disrupt their education. As you can see, they're 4 times more likely to change schools. There are often good reasons for that, but the effect is a lot of interrupted instruction. On the right-hand side, you'll see they also experience a rate of disability that's 3 times the rate of the general population. And then interestingly, on the bottom, is they are disproportionately attending poor quality schools. So 15% of children in foster care attend the lowest performing 10% of schools in California. So we've got some of the most high risk, kind of educationally fragile students attending schools that are really the least able to meet their complex needs. And this information is drawn from an excellent study, the Invisible Achievement Gap. And I do want to let you know that all of the citations for every slide are included at the end of the presentation, along with hyperlinks to the actual studies, because we know that many of you want to know where this information came from. So what this really adds up to is very serious academic delays. And this is drawn from the same study. And what was really important about this study, which was funded by the Stewart Foundation, is that for the first time, we were able to compare foster youth academic outcomes with a similarly disadvantaged group. When you compare foster youth to the general population, it's really kind of inappropriate because the characteristics of foster youth are so distinct. But this study, for the first time, looked at a comparison group that was quite similar in that they had similar rates of disability, English language learners, and low income. And what we found is that even relative to comparison groups that among many demographics are similarly positioned, foster youth are still faring worse. And so you have a full half that are far below basic or below basic on that California standard state in English language arts. And this is cumulative. It keeps on accumulating over the academic life of a foster youth. So by the time they're getting in college, again, we're not comparing them necessarily with the general population. Maybe your child's going to college. Hopefully mine will eventually. They've lived for a long period of time in an intact home. But when you compare them to that very high-risk comparison group, they're still faring worse. And so what this really means, this lack of persistence, is, by age 26, we have young people who are dramatically less likely to have achieved a college degree. And so, there's so many numbers that are flying around, but the really only definitive one we have on foster youth specifically is the Midwest study. And, I recognize that that is not California, but it is the best, most authoritative figure we have. And as you can see, by age 26, 8% of foster youth either have an AA, a BA, or 1 or more years of graduate school. And we're looking at almost half of the same age comparison group. So, all of the risk that they experience coming into the system, the challenges they face while they're in the system, and really adds up. And so why is this so dramatic? Why are we, why is this kind of our problem, right? Well, the reality is that the education level in the United States of America is one of the drivers of long-term economic security. And so, this slide pretty much tells the full picture. You can see our young people at the bottom of the left-hand side, less than a high school diploma, some college or no college. Those young people are really living in poverty. And they're not living in poverty until they turn 25 or 30. This is the long-term low-income population in the United States. And you can see the big jump that happens when you get the bachelor's degree, the master's degree, and certainly the professional degree or beyond that. Not surprising, there are absolutely directly correlated rates of unemployment on the right-hand side. And so, we know that why we are doing the work we're doing is to give young people in foster care every opportunity to thrive in young adulthood and for their full adult lives. And so if we knew we had a key that could achieve that, wouldn't we want to turn that key and to make that accessible? And so at this time, in our place, in our culture, in the United States, it is higher education. Now, in other Western industrialized democracies in Western Europe, there still is a safety net where people potentially don't require this. Somewhat of a safety net exists here, but it's a tough row to hoe without a college degree. And so that's really what this bill is about and our work is about that we're talking about today. So if the goal is a college degree, what does it take to get there? And for foster youth, an essential ingredient is financial aid. So the chart in front of you shows kind of the rate of receipt of financial aid for 3 of our main financial aid programs here in California. On the right hand, you have the Board of Governors fee waiver. And this is a tremendous program in our community college system. Many of you may not know about it, but we talk about free community college. Well, California, for low-income people, essentially has it. The Board of Governors fee waiver is a waiver that waives the per unit enrollment fee based if you are low income. So the cost per unit is $46 a unit. If you're enrolled in 12 units, that's $522 a semester, or a little over $1,100 per year. So we are making community college in California more accessible than ever to low-income people, which is spectacular. And you can see there, 85% of our foster youth are getting the BOG fee waiver. Now, the BOG fee waiver doesn't come for nothing. You have to have a 2.0 or greater to continue to receive it, and you also have to complete 50% of your coursework. So there is an expectation about making and achieving progress to continue to get the BOG fee waiver. Again, and the great news is 85% of our foster youth, they're getting it and they're keeping it. but you can see how the numbers go down dramatically when you look at the Pell and you look at the Cal Grant. And that is why we're really focused today specifically on the Pell. And, you know, kind of this report came out in 2015, and it was really the first time that this evidence had been, marshaled in the state of California for foster youth in community colleges. And it set forth a lot of investigation about why our foster youth receiving the Pell at such a low rate when we know 85% of them should likely be getting it. Why are only 50% getting it? And that, in a nutshell, is the purpose of SB 12. The provisions in SB 12 are the steps that we and many experts around the state have developed that we believe will get us from that 50% to that 85%. But before we talk about those provisions, I just want to highlight why this low rate of Pell receipt is so problematic. Because you might be thinking, wow, well, if there's the BOG fee waiver and you get your units for free, why do they really need the Pell? Why is it troubling for the Pell to be out of reach for half of foster youth? Well, let's start with this orange box. I hate to state the obvious, but sometimes we simply must. Foster youth don't have parents to help pay for college. Parental earnings and borrowing in the United States is the number way to pay for college. So, most people who have children in college, the parents are using their current income and borrowing. Combined, that is the number one way college is paid for in the U.S. Well, you might think, well, that's not true for low-income people. It also holds true for low-income people. When it comes to heavy lifting, paying for college, parents are shouldering the load. So what does it mean if a person doesn't have a parent to do that? It puts them in a dramatically disadvantaged situation. So that Pell can be the parent for the foster youth. It can step in and help fill the gap that most students who are in college, including low-income students and including students in community college, are having filled by their parents. The second box, the yellow box, is the Pell Grant is an entitlement. So, we love the CAFYES Education Training Voucher. We believe in it. We think it's an essential tool to help young people achieve their college dreams. However, it is funded at a certain level, and when the money runs out, the last person who didn't get it doesn't get it. That's very different than the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is an entitlement. If a young person meets the eligibility criteria, they shall receive it. The funding does not run out. And so in that respect, it's such an essential piece of the financial aid puzzle. The blue box, Pell is the largest single federal grant program. So it's a very rich benefit. It is prorated based on enrollment, unlike the CAFYES. So the number you see on your screen is what it is if you're enrolled full-time. On the purple box, financial aid receipt is a predictor of retention and degree completion. But what's interesting is the best kind of financial aid and that is the most predictive is not loans, and it's not earned income through work study. It is grant income. And so you can see there $1,000 in grant aid increases the probability of graduation by 2%. This probably shouldn't be too surprising because it's giving students the money to stay enrolled. It's giving them the money to stay enrolled, more than part-time. And, that gives young people the ability to add up those credits and work and actually achieve the degree. The last item I really want to emphasize, because, when we talk about college for foster youth, we certainly get the feedback is, not every young person is ready for college or is interested in college, and we absolutely recognize that. The great thing about the Pell is that it can be used for the hundreds, potentially thousands of career and technical education programs around the state of California. And just to kind of satisfy my own personal curiosity, I went to the City College of San Francisco website this morning. I said, well, I wonder how many CTE programs they have. City College alone has over 170 programs. Some of the really interesting ones: biomanufacturing, engineered plumbing systems, carpentry, residential plumbing, EKG technician, health information clerk, medical biller. These are all certificate programs that young people can use in the short term to move out of the minimum wage and into the living wage. So if you're working with young people who, yeah, they're not interested potentially, or they're not ready, they want to live on their own, they want to experience a bit of economic security, there are short-term training programs, and financial aid is available to support them in that decision. So from here, I want to turn it over to Martha Joseph. Again, Martha is our operations manager here at John Burton Advocates for Youth. She's also a former foster youth, and Martha led the issuance of a survey of the Burton Book Fund recipients. So now I'm going to hand it over to Martha.
Thank you very much, Amy. I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to be on this call, and I wanted to first give you some information about the survey. So we surveyed 337 students who participated in our Burton Book Fund. The Burton Book Fund is a direct service program that we offer to youth enrolled in college that helps them with the purchase of their textbooks. This year we've helped over 1,000 foster youth attending college in California with textbook support. We've worked with 75 campuses to make sure this program reaches as many youth as possible. And this is just a little plug. If you are interested in finding out information about the Burton Book Fund, you can go to our website and find out details about it, or you can contact me directly. My information is available on our website, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. So I'm just going to dive in. So what we did is we checked with these students to find out the impact that the Pell Grant has had on them. And we had some very interesting findings. If you look, 42.1% of youth surveyed said that they would likely disenroll from school if they were not able to access the Pell Grant. That is an incredibly large number of youth who would not be enrolled in school without that financial support. A close 36.1% said that they would have to reduce their course load in order to work more. And we know the struggle that can happen when youth have to divide their time between work and school. So what we're hoping is that the Pell Grant would be able to allow these youth to dedicate all of their time to education and the achievement of a degree. So, and I know that there are many college campuses that are on the line right now that have had the experience with youth having to disenroll, reduce their course load because of their inability to support themselves, because, as Amy stated earlier, they don't have that safety net of family, community that allows them to have a place to stay, help them with transportation when they need to get to classes and things like that. So I am going to move on to slide 11. Oh, thank you, the next slide. And this is what it has meant to youth who didn't receive the Pell Grant. So 47.1% said that they would work more to maintain their course load. And these are youth that have not received the Pell Grant, so most of them are likely working already. 33.3% said they would reduce their course load to work in order to stay enrolled. So these youth most likely would be able to maintain their time in school, but would have to take longer to complete their degree. So the Pell Grant would hopefully help them in order to stay enrolled and achieve their academic goals. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. If you're interested in receiving more information about this survey, we'd be glad to share that with you. Please feel free to contact me or anyone at John Burton Advocates for Youth for that information.
Thanks, Martha. So now let's turn to the actual provisions we're talking about. So the goals, 3 goals of SB 12: to help foster youth apply, streamline the verification, and expand campus support. I'm going to talk about the first 2, and then I'm going to turn it over to Debbie to talk about the expanding campus support. So first, this concern about college success didn't come from nowhere. It came from the fact that we really have more older youth in care than ever. As you can see from the slide, about 1 in 7 youth is college age now. Now that's pretty new since the implementation of extended foster care. But a full 1 in 4 youth in foster care is 16 or older. So, we really, with 1 in 4 young people being 16 or older, when that 16-year age hits, if you're a parent, you certainly start getting actively thinking about what those plans are after college. As we talked about in the past, before AB 12 and extended foster care, we really had more of a baton passing. But now we no longer pass that baton. That baton is still in our hands. We're still running with it and headstrong into post-secondary education. So the first provision of SB 12 is really helping foster youth apply for college and financial aid. If in a staff meeting you are ever needing some type of icebreaker, a fun one is to pose the question, who is supposed to help a foster youth apply for college and financial aid? The list that you see on the screen is some of the answers you'll get, and you'll probably get some more that even aren't on here. Now, the truth is these are all great answers, but it's very confusing for a young person who, when a child is raised in the custody of their parents, it's pretty clear who the main person on the hook is. The kind of clarity gets a little bit more diffuse when you have an individual who has a lot of adults in their life playing a variety of different roles. And so what that results in is young people not getting the support that they need to apply for college and financial aid. And this screen here is from the Mark Courtney study, the actually Cal Youth study at age 19. It surveyed young people who were attending college and asked them how much help did they get with college assistance and college planning. The good news is, 1 in 5 said more than enough help, and another 23% said enough help. But the balance, around 46%, said some but not enough, only a little or no help. So we know this is an area where we need to put more effort, more energy, more attention. And so that's really what SB 12 intends to do. And so the first real provision of SB 12 is to require a person to be identified in the case plan to assist the foster youth in the college and financial aid application process. Now, many of you must be saying, that's got to be in there, doesn't it? And the truth is not really. No, it is not in the case plan. It is in the TILP, but the case plan as the primary organizing document of the child welfare case. There are a lot of requirements around the K-12 experience, but there isn't this level of specificity in the case plan in regards to post-secondary education. And so this provision is a first effort to say that post-secondary education is a core element of what we're trying to achieve in foster care. We want to identify a person who will be available to support the young person in this process. So are we asking all social workers to become experts on financial aid? And the answer to that is an unequivocal no. We're asking the social worker to do what they do best, which is to broker. Just as they don't provide health care services, but ensure that the child has seen their health care provider, we're asking that the person identifies a young person to help the youth and ensures the youth receives the help they require. So it's, again, that brokering role. It's trying to be kind of the connective tissue, the person who can go back to this list and say it's going to be this person, so that we can really know that there's clarity around, what is the plan for you to apply for college, and this requirement would be beginning when a young person turns 16. The second provision in the bill regards financial aid verification, and what you see on the screen is a very simplified version of how financial aid is processed. And for those of you financial aid officers out there, I apologize for the simplification, but how it currently works is a young person completes a FAFSA. The information is sent to the institutions that they list on the FAFSA. The financial aid award is packaged by those institutions. An award letter is sent to the individual, and then the breakdown in the process for foster youth is the verification. So at this point, many, not all, colleges require a foster youth to submit proof of their dependency status. Now, why is that required? It's required because if you have been a dependent on or after age 13, you are automatically an independent student, which means you're going to get a lot more financial aid than if you're not an independent student. And so this is a kind of good governance. This is, let's make sure that the appropriate resources are going to the appropriate people. So there is a verification process. Unfortunately, while attempting to have good governance and accountability and to prevent any fraud, this process can really trip foster youth up. They can lose access to the Pell along with other financial aid at this step. Because they have a difficulty getting this verification. You've got thousands of young people around the state of California asking these kind of questions. So who was my social worker? Does my foster mom have this paper? Who was my attorney? How do I get this? So, many young people from around the state, desperately looking to get their hands on this piece of paper to give to the financial aid office in order to prove that they're a foster youth and that they have independent status. Now, I know some of you may be wondering, didn't you guys work on this a while ago? Well, yes, and AB 592, authored by Mr. Stone, did authorize the Foster Care Ombudsman's Office to provide this verification of a foster youth dependency or wardship status. And we're very pleased about that, and we feel like that's a very important step forward. However, since February 2016, a little over 400 or 422 foster youth have been provided this verification of the thousands of young people who need it. So now if we didn't have a better way to do this, we'd probably just say, well, that's life. You got to run around and get paper. That's part of being an adult, right, guys? But it creates a considerable workload on the social workers that need to generate this paper, on the Foster Care Ombudsman's Office, and equally important to the actual foster youth themselves who are losing access to financial aid because they're unable to provide this information. So the second provision of SB 12 would simply automate the verification for foster youth. Again, this is a simplified version of it, but it would require that CDSS provide data to the California Student Aid Commission. So the California Student Aid Commission is a wonderful state agency that administers billions of dollars in financial aid for students attending higher education. So under this scenario, CDSS would submit a list of young people who are eligible, who are in care on or after age 13. CSAC would conduct a verification and upload this information to its grant delivery system. So for those of us in child welfare, their grant delivery system is kind of the equivalent of the child welfare CWS CMS. And then instead of having individual young people, submitting individual pieces of paper thousands of times over all around the state, the financial aid officials would be able to access this information in a campus-based portal. So this isn't science fiction. It actually is in place for the CAFYE education and training voucher. The eligibility criteria are different, so it can't be simply laid on top of that system. It would need to be a parallel system. But it really has been shown to increase the rate of CAFYE utilization, and we believe it will have a similar effect for the Pell Grant. So that's just kind of what that would include. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Debbie Rauscher, who is going to talk about the third provision of SB 12, which is expanding access to CAFYES.
Thank you very much. So as Amy mentioned, the third provision is expanding access to something known as CAFYES. And I'm going to start by giving a little bit of history of the program. So the CAFYES program was established through Senate Bill 1023 in 2014 and was funded in the 2015-16 budget. The Community College Chancellor's Office issued funding to 10 districts through a competitive process in 2015, which resulted in the establishment of 26 of these programs. The CAFYES programs are housed within the EOPS program on campus, and for those of you who might not be familiar, that's a program that exists at all 113 community colleges that's designed to assist a range of young people who have educational disadvantages of some sort. So within that, there's now a special program known as CAFYES that's specifically designed to provide some additional support just for foster youth. And there was a $15 million appropriation in the 15-16 budget that was given in order to support this program. Next slide. So you might be wondering, who are these 26 campuses that got this funding? So here's a list, and it's also available on the California College Pathways website if you want to take a longer look at it. And you can see that there were a number of different counties around the state that got access to the funding. So these are the 26 colleges that now have this program up and running and operational. You can also see, however, that while there's a certain number here of regions in the state that are represented, there's some very significant large areas of the state of California that don't at this point have access to this program. Next slide. So what does CAFYES provide? It provides a mix of different types of services. On the one hand, academic support, and then also specialized services for foster youth. And you can see the list of the different types of assistance that are provided. But one of really the key provisions, one of the key services that's provided by CAFYES is making sure that students are accessing all of the financial aid that they are eligible for. And it's a complicated process, and for most foster youth, for most students in general, foster youth or not, it takes a fair bit of effort and really working with somebody who has expertise to make sure that foster youth are really getting through all the stages of the process necessary to access their financial aid. So they have all these different types of support with their academics and tutoring and matriculation, counseling, and access to other types of specialized services, transportation, etc. But of course, the financial aid piece is key. Next slide. So who is eligible for CAFYES? It's not all foster youth. There is a specific definition of foster youth that's defined in the statute. So the folks that are eligible for CAFYES are students whose dependency was established or continued after the youth's 16th birthday. So in other words, they were in care at some point after turning 16. And at the time of enrollment in the program, they're younger than age 26. So this eligibility aligns with a lot of other programs for foster youth. This kind of cutoff of being in care at some point after the age of 16 is the same standard that's used for the CAFYES Education and Training Voucher, for the Independent Living Skills Program, for priority registration, in order to get extended benefits for a youth who was placed into guardianship or was adopted. The cutoff is also 16. If somebody was in care at any point after the age of 16, they get to maintain those benefits up until age 21. So it's very consistent with the other programs that exist for foster youth. Next slide. So you might be asking, well, why do so many programs link eligibility to age 16? So one of the reasons for this is that research has found that, unfortunately, youth in foster care at the age of 16 are a lot less likely to find what is referred to in the child welfare world as permanency. In other words, either they're reunified with their biological parents, they're adopted, or they exit to a guardianship situation. In California, if you're in care at the age of 16, you're 38% less likely to find permanency than if you were in care at age 13. And if you're in care at age 17, it drops even further. You're 79% less likely than you would be at age 13 to end up in some sort of permanency. Next slide. So what does not having a family mean for a college student? You know, we know that if you're in care at the age of 16, then unfortunately it's a lot less likely that you're going to have some sort of family situation that you can use. One, chances are it's going to be a lot harder for you to find a place to live. In 2014, 54% of college students were living at home with family. More recent statistics from 2016 show that living with a parent is currently the most common young adult living arrangement, with a full 32% of those between the ages of 18 and 34. I don't even know if that's still really considered young adult, but all the way up to age 34, 32% of them are living with a parent. And so for youth in foster care, they're not going to have nearly the same housing choices that somebody who has exited the foster care system or was never in foster care will have. In addition, they don't have the same resources to help pay for college. And Amy talked about this earlier. In 2016, parental savings and borrowing paid for 38% of the cost of college in the United States. This is the greatest source of funding to use to pay for college. It exceeds all other sources, including grants, scholarships, income from work, etc. And as Amy mentioned, this holds true for low-income students and students attending two-year colleges. So this is not exclusive to somebody who's coming from a higher income situation. So you can see that a student who has not transitioned into a family setting, a permanent family setting, is at a big disadvantage. Next slide. So why are we looking to expand the number of colleges? As I mentioned before, one of the key elements of the CAFYES program is to assist youth with making sure that they're accessing all the financial aid for which they are eligible. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about some survey results that demonstrate this. And so if we really want to expand access to the Pell Grant, we need to expand access to the services that are going to help youth to get this grant. And you can see from the slide in front of you that right now only 23% of campuses do have a CAFYES program, so over 3/4 do not. And when we look at the actual number of foster youth who are on the different campuses, you can see that 72%, so really the vast majority right now of foster youth, do not have access to this additional support. When we took a look at the campuses around the state and the numbers of foster youth on those college campuses, some of the colleges really with the largest numbers of foster youth don't have access to this program. So there are 2 campuses that have over 750 foster youth that are not CAFYES campuses, 13 additional campuses that have over 500 foster youth also not having access to the support, and 34 campuses with somewhere in the range of 250 to 500 foster youth on campus. So these are significant numbers of foster youth on these college campuses that don't currently have access to these services that can help ensure that they're getting the Pell Grant. Next slide. So how is CAFYES doing after 1 year? We've had a year of implementation, and we're very excited to share that the program is really moving along like gangbusters. So all 26 campuses that received the funding have implemented their program. We did a survey of the campuses, and based on the information they reported, there's over 1,100 foster youth being served, so 1,157. And CAFYES participants, we found, are 46% more likely than foster youth not participating in the program to have received a Pell Grant. And we actually anticipate that as the programs get even more solidified, we'll see this number go up. So it's pretty clear that participation in a program, in a CAFYES program, really does improve one's access to the Pell Grant. Next slide. So we conducted a survey of CAFYES participants. We sent an email out to the CAFYES coordinators and asked them to forward the email to the students in their program. And we got 196 responses from 14 of the 26 CAFYES programs. You can see a little bit there about the background information, demographic information of the students. So pretty diverse in terms of racial and ethnic background. About a quarter of them, a little less than a quarter of them, are custodial parents. And you can see that the basic unit requirement to enroll in CAFYES is having to be in at least 9 units. And if a student ends up dropping a class or something like that, they don't actually get kicked out of the program. They can stay in, but they have to be in at 9 units when they first enroll. And you can see that the vast majority of them have been able to maintain that and are still enrolled either in between 9 and 12 units or full-time at 12 units and more. In fact, the majority of them are enrolled full-time. Next slide. So what CAFYES services are students using? So we asked them, we gave them a list of choices and said, which one of these have you accessed? And they can choose as many as they have participated in. And so you can see there financial support to help textbooks is the biggest one, and academic advising. But then close after academic advising is direct financial assistance and financial aid counseling. So a lot of students, 2/3 of the students reported that they have been using the CAFYES program specifically to make sure that they're getting the Pell Grant and the financial aid for which they are eligible. And then I won't read through the rest of them there. We will be sending this PowerPoint out so you can take a look more closely at some of the other services that these students are getting. Next slide. And what do students report that these services are helping them achieve? So most notably, 82%, which is a huge number, reported that participation in the CAFYES program is helping them to get the financial aid that they are eligible to receive. So this really backed up our hypothesis that expanding access to the CAFYES program would enable more foster youth to get financial aid, and it does seem very clear that this, in fact, is what's taking place. Of course, they're getting all these other great services as well, enrolling in the correct classes, which is huge. Another financial aid related issue is if they don't enroll in the correct classes, they end up using up their financial aid on classes that maybe aren't counting towards their ultimate degree or certificate goal. And so by making sure that they're enrolled in the correct classes, it really helps reduce the time to completion and make sure that they're getting to where they need to be getting. Next slide. We also asked overall how helpful do students find CAFYES, and the results were phenomenal, as you can see here, and very clear that this program is making a huge difference. And so a full 86.5% reported that the program was extremely helpful. Another 11% found it helpful. That's a total of 97% of students reporting that it was either extremely helpful or helpful to them. A very, very, very small number there, 0.5%, reporting that the program hasn't been helpful. So from initial reports, it does appear that the program is really doing what it was intended to do. Next slide. So what exactly does SB 12 do around expanding access to this fabulous program? What SB 12 proposes to do is increase the number of CAFYES funded districts from 10 to 20. So currently in statute, only up to 10 districts can be allocated funding. This would increase that to up to 20 districts. Our estimates based on the spending reports thus far is that the current 26 campuses that are funded will spend about $9 million in 27-18 to operate their programs. As was mentioned early on in my overview of CAFYES, if you recall, the allocation for the program is actually $15 million. And so there's $6 million remaining that would go towards funding this expansion to additional campuses. In terms of how the campuses would be selected, most likely it would be through some sort of competitive process. The California Community College Chancellor's Office would be the entity that would define and determine exactly what the process would be for figuring out which campuses would get the additional expansion. So with that, I will turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you, Debbie. So these three provisions, we believe will increase the rate of Pell receipt. And so what you see in front of you is the current rate of Pell receipt is 50% for foster youth in community college. So based on the number of foster youth attending community college, about 15,523 foster youth are receiving the Pell Grant, and receiving about $64.2 million. And that is prorated based on their actual enrollment, because it it is prorated, as I said, unlike the CAFYE, so that if you are enrolled half-time, you get half. It's broken down actually into 4 categories. If we can get the rate of Pell receipt up from that 50% just to the current level of the CAFYES programs, which is 73%. And again, we believe that is lower than it will ultimately be, but let's be conservative. If we can move it to that 73%, that will bring an extra 7,000 young people to receive the Pell Grant and an extra $25.9 million in additional federal funding. And again, this is not assuming everyone's enrolled full-time, because that is not the reality of foster youth. This is based on actual enrollment figures of foster youth in California community colleges, and based on that. So, what we're doing is we're accessing federal funding to support foster youth and to help them stay in college. So money is important, and we care about money, sure, but much more than money, we care about them actually supporting young people to achieve their dreams. We know from the Cal Youth study they have amazing aspirations to achieve a 4-year degree and beyond. So kind of based on the earlier study, that $1,000 of aid increases the likelihood of degree completion by 2%. You've got on the left-hand side what your likelihood is currently. It's about 8%. You're threading a needle. It's a low probability, event, and you hate to say that, but empirically it's true. So if we can bring that extra $5,800, and this is based on the full amount, we could really increase that graduation rate notably, and that is based on full-time enrollment. So this is really more of an estimate, but it gives you a sense of what is possible with stronger financial support for foster youth to remain in college. And this is, again, with federal funding. The Pell Grant is fully funded by the federal government. The cost for California would be, the cost of identifying a person and including that in the case plan, the cost of automating the verification, and then there wouldn't be additional cost with the expansion of CAFYES, because that would be using the unfunded portion of the current CAFYES budget. So we don't have a hard estimate at this time, but we're looking at a relatively modest investment to bring in practically tens of millions of dollars for California foster youth and really helping them. And we're not even talking about the real returns for the state of California in terms of income tax. When we have foster youth, springboarded into that middle class, paying income tax, paying sales tax, and all the other things that come with being an economically secure resident of the state of California. So here's where we are with SB 12. We're very early in the process. We're just, the bill deadline is this Friday. That's the deadline by which, bills have to be introduced into the legislature. So we're absolutely delighted that Senator Jim Bell is our champion in this effort. I mean, he was one of the primary authors, along with Karen Bass, of AB 12. If you look at his legislative history, it reads like, just a tremendous set of accomplishments for foster youth, for children with disabilities, and for the most vulnerable Californians. And so we are extremely appreciative that he is partnering with us to author this legislation and to be our champion in the legislature. So the way the process works, little Civics 101 is, first it will go through the Senate side. It'll go through the Education Committee and the Human Services Committee, and then the Appropriations Committee. If it makes it all the way, then we'll have the opportunity to have it voted on by the full Senate. If we make it all the way through the Assembly, then have the opportunity to have the full Assembly vote on it. And then there's a September 15th deadline to have things passed by the second House, and by October 15th, the governor has to sign or veto bills that he received by September 15th. So it's not a sprint, to say the least. This is really more of a marathon, and we're really asking those of you who believe in kind of what we've presented and believe that this is a practical way of increasing access to post-secondary education outcomes to join with us in this, maybe not quite a marathon, maybe more like a half marathon, It's not quite as long as certainly a federal bill, but we do need your help. I mean, our whole theory of change at John Burton Advocates for Youth is about working with people in the field, offering technical assistance, working with the CAFYES campuses in learning communities, learning what's working, learning what's not working, and then taking your ideas essentially and translating them into policy ideas, and then working that through the state legislative process. Then turning back to you in that process and saying, will you please help us make this successful? So it's a very iterative process. It's a process where we're not coming up with ideas on our own. Nothing we talked about today was hatched in the mind of Amy Lemley or Debbie Rauscher. It was hatched in the mind of people on community college campuses, social workers, CAFYES, and foster youth themselves. And so that's a kind of a long pleading way of saying we're only going to reach that last little arrow if we can call on your help. And so the first step in that process is getting a support letter. So we very much would like, if you believe that this is a good policy, to put that in letter and to send it to us. We're collecting all of the letters for the March Senate Education Committee, and we'll forward them all to the consultant. And essentially that's your way, either as an individual, as an organization, saying that you support this. And we don't want you to do that unless you feel very clear that this is something that seems like a good idea, and we're happy to have further conversations with you and or your organization and walk through the bill language line by line. We'd also like you to really meet with your legislators in the district about this bill. I don't think there's anyone who's going to say this is a bad idea. The question, are they going to take a leadership position on it? Is it something they're really going to stand with Mr. Bell to champion? And by meeting with legislators in your district and showing them that real people are behind this, that's the kind of thing that can take this legislation and make it something that isn't just a good concept in paper, but real and alive and much more meaningful to our elected officials. We're working very hard to have foster youth get involved. We've engaged them two ways. We've surveyed our book fund recipients. We've also surveyed CAFYES participants, and we've invited them, do you want to be involved? Do you want to testify at hearings? Do you want to write letters? Do you want to tell your story? And we've literally had probably over 150 who immediately said yes, who love the idea of being engaged and trying to kind of make the future of foster care perhaps better than the one they experienced. But the first step in the process really is that support letter. So if we're going to follow all the registrants for the website, we'll follow up with you, we'll attach it. It's also on our website under support legislation, and then you have Luce's email right on there, which you can go to there. So with that, we're going to spend just the last few minutes answering some questions. If you do have questions, now's certainly the time to type them in. And here's the first one I'll start with, and I'll hand it over to you, Debbie. Debbie, is there an age limit for receiving a Pell Grant?
There is not. There's no age limit.
Do you want to talk about the term limit, like the number of terms or the number of years?
Yeah, so there is a restriction on how long you can get a Pell Grant. So it's 6 years at full-time equivalents. In other words, if you were only going to school half-time and getting a prorated Pell Grant for half-time enrollment, you could get it for 12 half-time years, but it's 6 full-time years is the maximum amount of time that you can get a Pell Grant.
Thank you. Next one is about the participation requirements. In a nutshell, the question is, I mentioned for the BOG fee waiver, there are certain GPA and progress requirements. Are those requirements in place for CAFYES?
So there's actually an exemption for foster youth who meet that same definition as the definition for CAFYES. So foster youth have a little more leeway in terms of being able to maintain that BOG fee waiver even if they're struggling a little bit more academically. So they're not subject to those GPA and satisfactory academic progress requirements.
Okay. The next question is, these CAFYE programs, are these Guardian Scholars programs? Is that, I think there's a person has heard about that name and they want a little bit more clarification about that.
Right. So the answer to that is a little bit different depending on which college. So in some cases, colleges did have some sort of foster youth support program, often referred to as Guardian Scholars, although at different colleges they do have a variety of different names. And so when a Guardian Scholars program existed before the CAFYES program developed, the way that that's been managed by the colleges is a little bit different. So CAFYES, for the most part, is distinct from the Guardian Scholars programs, although in some cases the Guardian Scholars and the CAFYES programs really are operating essentially as one from the perspective of the student. The way the funding works on the back end, you know, the CAFYES can only serve certain students, but the student goes to one central location and then gets referred to whichever services for which they're eligible, whether that be CAFYES or Guardian Scholars. In other cases, the programs exist a little more side by side, where they make referrals back and forth depending on eligibility and depending on what services a young person needs. And then at other schools, there was no Guardian Scholars or similar program prior to CAFYES, and CAFYES is really the only foster youth support program on that campus. So they are different. The funding sources tend to be different, and the way they're structured tends to be different, but depending on the college, it varies the extent to which those exist side by side or collaborative with each other.
Thank you, Debbie. Here's getting a little deep into financial aid, but I think you're there. I mean, it's a little too deep for me, but and we don't pretend to be financial aid people. We let the experts do that. But this one is, am I correct that a BOG fee waiver does not require a high school diploma, but a Pell Grant does require a high school diploma? Debbie Rusher.
Yes, basically that is correct. So the Pell Grant requires a high school diploma or equivalent, so somebody can have a GED. That is a federal requirement. There's a very, very small exception to that, but I think that's way too in the weeds. For the vast, vast, vast majority of students, the Pell Grant does require that. And it's true that the BOG fee waiver requirements are more flexible. You don't necessarily have to have a high school diploma in place.
All right. Well, bravo. So next one, back to you. We're just having this little conversation. Are there CAFYES programs at any four-year schools?
There are no CAFYES programs. However, there are a lot of foster youth support programs at the four-year schools, and those, again, are often referred to as Guardian Scholars, although not entirely. Sometimes they have different names. So there are similar programs that exist. They are not called CAFYES, and the CAFYES funding source doesn't go towards those four-year programs. And for somebody who's interested in figuring out exactly what programs exist at what school, if you go on the California College Pathways website, which is cacollegepathways.org, and you click on the button that says Find Campus Support Programs, we do maintain a database of all the campus support programs at the community colleges and the four-year institutions that include Guardian Scholars type programs and CAFYES programs, and so you can look and figure out exactly what is available at any given college or university.
Okay, thank you. A participant wrote in and said, wanted to clarify also, CAFYE, ETV, does not require a high school diploma. So for those of you who are listening. Next question is, I'll answer this one. Who is the person that is designated to help a foster youth apply for college, or does it vary for each person? And you know, that is really what SB 12 is trying to get to. Which is there are many, many resources out there, so many resources out there. Right now it is not designated who that person is. So SB 12 would, you know, close that loop and designate that person. It's not going to be the same person. It's not going to be ILP for every young person. About, you know, a significant proportion aren't or able to participate in it. And so it's the judgment of the social worker who knows the case the best to say this is going to be the resource that is your primary support to apply for college and financial aid. Also, there was a mention that we did do a web seminar on March 9th that's going to talk about a wide range of campus support programs. So we'll make sure that those of you who register for this learn about that as well. Maybe we'll take one last question and wrap it up, unless another one comes through here. But Debbie, is there a GPA requirement for CAFYES? Might this be implemented in the future?
That's a really good question. I'm pretty sure the answer is no. There's not a GPA requirement. Honestly, I'd have to go double check the regulations to make sure that I am remembering that correctly. So I can look that up and get back to the person who asked the question, but I'm pretty sure that there is not.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't have a precise answer.
Well, we'll definitely follow up and we'll share the information with everyone. So thank you. That's a great question. That's the kind of thing we want to be able to answer. There's another one. Someone said Happy Valentine's Day. So Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. And then last one, with the recommendation of expanding CAFYES to 20 districts, should current CAFYES programs expect an allocation reduction? Very fair question. Debbie.
No, I wouldn't expect that there would be an allocation reduction because the amount of the existing allocations only totals $9 million. And so that means that there is $6 million unspent. So now ultimately it would be up to the folks at the Chancellor's office to figure out exactly how they would want to do the allocations. But there's no reason to expect that there have to be any sort of reduction to existing programs because, as I said, they're not fully utilizing the budget allocation currently.
And I'm going to add this more political point, than, which is it's a really, well, one question that just came in is why $6 million currently unspent? Was that intentional? That's more of a political answer. So when SB 1023 passed in 2014 and then the budget was allocated in 2015, there wasn't really any information about how many youth were in this eligible population, which is a very narrow population of, in care on or after age 16 and under age 26. And so $15 million of equity funds was set aside on an annual basis to say, since we don't know, let's, hope up to this amount will cover it. And I think what we're really seeing come into focus it is a quite narrow eligibility criteria and may even get smaller population over time if more young people can be reunified earlier and achieve permanence earlier. And so that's kind of the practical answer is that it was really unknown how many would be in this, and there was kind of an upper ceiling put out there. That being said, we're in very complex times financially and politically, and the practical decision to move forward on this, as certainly in addition to the powerful outcomes that we saw in terms of Pell Grant receipt, is that we want these funds that are being allocated on an annual basis to continue to be dedicated to this population. And so, I would be not totally truthful if I didn't share the concern that we are worried that it is being underspent. It's not a great thing to be underspent in our current climate. And so, given that the program has been implemented, it's showing very positive early returns, and that there are young people all over the state who need it and aren't getting it, that is the reason why the provisions included in SB 12. So, well, before we wrap it up, Debbie.
Can I just chime in? I did look up the regulations.
Okay.
And there is no GPA requirement. So it's sort of aligned with the provisions related to the BOG fee waiver in that a student actually can't be removed from the CAFYES program because they're on academic or progress probation. In other words, if they haven't met some certain GPA standard.
Well, thank you. Thank you for answering that. And thank you, everyone. I really hope we can count on many of you for your support. You see some source slides here. If you have any questions, that's our contact information. And again, we appreciate your partnership and all the different things that we do. And this concludes today's web seminar. Have a great day and happy Valentine's Day.